"Look, she has drugs in her bag." The flight attendant's voice rang out across the first-class cabin. She held up a small, vacuum-sealed package like a piece of evidence in a courtroom, her accusatory gaze fixed on the only black woman on the plane. "This passenger attempted to smuggle illegal substances onto this flight," she declared, her voice clear and unwavering. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Phones were already out, capturing every second of what would soon become one of the most watched flight scandals of the year. As the airport security team arrived and began escorting the poised, well-dressed woman down the narrow aisle, she barely blinked. Instead, she leaned in close to the smug flight attendant, her voice barely above a whisper, yet sharp enough to slice through the air. "You have no idea what you've just done." The flight attendant's smirk faltered. She had no way of knowing that the woman she had just framed was one of the most powerful intelligence operatives in the country. No way of knowing that she hadn't just ruined an innocent passenger's flight. She had set her own career, her freedom, and her carefully crafted life on fire. If you've ever been wrongly accused or witnessed someone face discrimination for simply existing, you're going to want to watch every second of this explosive story. Hit subscribe and drop a comment below if you believe that justice should always win. Because what happens next? You need to see it to believe it. Agent Naomi Ford had been trained to anticipate threats before they happened. At 39, she had spent the last 16 years climbing the ranks in the CIA's most classified operations, breaking through barriers that many had assumed would hold her back. Her gender, her race, and the deep-seated network of old-school intelligence officers who never expected a black woman from Atlanta to outrank them all. But she had, and she had done it flawlessly. Now, as the newly appointed head of covert aviation security, Naomi was on one of the most critical missions of her career. A massive drug smuggling ring had been exploiting commercial airlines to move high-value narcotics, and this particular carrier, Jetstream Airways, was at the center of the investigation. Sitting in her hotel room, she zipped up her carry-on bag as her secure phone lit up with an incoming call. The name on the screen, Director Sloan. "The airline's CEO has been briefed about your cover," his voice came through crisply. "No one else knows. As far as the flight crew is concerned, you're just another first-class passenger." Naomi nodded, absorbing the instructions. "Your real objective," Director Sloan continued, "is to identify which crew members are part of the operation. Keep your eyes on a name flagged in our briefing. Vanessa Reed. We suspect she's been facilitating the movement of illegal shipments mid-flight. You need to confirm that before we act." "Understood," Naomi replied, slipping her phone back into her bag. What made Naomi an exceptional agent wasn't just her flawless record or her sharp analytical mind, it was something far more rare, an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. She noticed things others missed. She sensed danger before it even had a chance to take shape. As she moved through the busy LAX International Airport, Naomi was already working. Without breaking stride, she caught a toddler just before he tumbled down from a seat where his distracted mother had left him. She spotted a security officer wearing an expired ID badge. She caught the hushed exchange between two TSA agents who should have been paying attention to the scanners instead of murmuring in the corner. Every observation was silently logged into her phone, a highly encrypted CIA tool disguised as an ordinary social media app. Her mission today was simple. Watch the flight crew. Observe their patterns. Identify who among them was involved in trafficking drugs across state lines using commercial air travel. And the first person on her list? Vanessa Reed. In another part of the airport, Vanessa Reed was rushing through the employee entrance of Jetstream Airways, flashing a quick smile at the security guard as she hurried past. She was late. Again. At 33, Vanessa had the kind of carefully curated image that hid the chaos behind the scenes. Expensive handbag, immaculate nails, golden brown highlights that cost more than some people's rent. But beneath the surface, she was drowning. Maxed out credit cards, overdue bills, and a promotion that never came. As she scanned the first-class manifest, she let out a quiet scoff. "First class isn't what it used to be," she muttered to her coworker, Logan Pierce, as she scrolled through the names on the list. "They'll let anyone up there now, as long as they've got the money." Logan's laugh was awkward. his discomfort obvious. It wasn't the first time Vanessa had made comments like this, especially when certain names didn't fit the first-class image in her mind. Vanessa had once believed that her chestnut hair, green eyes, and perfect smile would open every door, that moving up in the airline world was a given. But when Renee Caldwell, a black woman with fewer years on the job but better passenger ratings, was promoted instead of her, something inside Vanessa hardened. It's all quotas now, she had complained to anyone who would listen. They just want diversity hires. But what Vanessa's coworkers didn't know, what no one knew, was that her bitterness had evolved into something far more dangerous. Because 6 months ago, when an anonymous first-class passenger made her an offer, helped smuggle shipments past security in exchange for a cut of the profits, Vanessa didn't even hesitate. In the dimly lit airport restroom, Vanessa Reed gripped her phone tightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I'll make the drop this trip," she muttered, her free hand clutching the sink as anxiety pressed down on her. "The package is secure. No, I'm not backing out. Do you know how deep I am in debt?" Her eyes darted to the closed stall doors behind her, scanning for any sign of unwanted ears. Finally, she ended the call and reached into her makeup bag. Beneath a layer of high-end cosmetics lay a vacuum-sealed package, high-grade pharmaceuticals bound for the black market, worth thousands, worth enough to keep her creditors at bay for another month. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa snapped the bag shut, lifted her chin, and walked out of the restroom. By the time she rejoined the crew at the gate, her mask of polished professionalism was back in place. No one would suspect a thing. What she didn't know was that this flight wasn't going to be like the others. Because Naomi Ford was watching. As Naomi settled into her first-class seat, she appeared like any other well-dressed, high-profile traveler. But her mind was already at work. Her sharp, trained eyes didn't miss a thing. She noted how Vanessa's demeanor shifted between passengers, the warm, attentive service for the white male CEO in 2A, the easy laughter shared with an elderly white couple. But when she reached Naomi's seat, her expression cooled. "Anything to drink?" The question was clipped, lacking the polite ma'am she had offered to every other passenger. "Sparkling water, please," Naomi replied, her voice even. She didn't react when Vanessa all but dropped the drink onto her tray. A stark contrast to the delicate, careful placement of glasses for other passengers. It was a small thing, a moment most people would dismiss. But Naomi was here for these moments. Her job wasn't just to investigate a drug operation, it was to document the biases that allowed it to thrive. Vanessa felt Naomi's gaze lingering on her. That unshaken attention made her skin crawl. When their eyes met briefly, a sudden wave of unease gripped her. "That woman in 3A, she doesn't belong here," Vanessa whispered to Logan Pierce as they prepared for takeoff. "She's the only black passenger in first class." Logan tensed but shrugged her off. "Just focus on the job, Vanessa." As the plane ascended, Vanessa's nerves tightened. She had a delivery to make, and the pressure was mounting. If she wasn't careful, she could ruin everything. Then she glanced at Naomi again, the woman who watched too closely, who noticed too much. A dangerous idea began to take shape. A plan that would eliminate a threat to her operation while reinforcing everything she already believed. If she played it right, this woman wouldn't just be removed from the flight, she'd be disgraced. And no one would question it. Naomi wasn't just sitting in her seat, tapping on her tablet. She was watching. She pressed the call button above her head. 1 minute passed, then 5. She watched Vanessa walk by multiple times, assisting other passengers while ignoring the glowing signal above Naomi's seat. Across the aisle, a white man in 2C pressed his call button. Vanessa was at his side in seconds, all warm smiles. "What can I get for you, sir?" "Just a scotch, neat when you have a moment." "Absolutely. I'll bring that right away." Naomi calmly observed the stark difference in treatment. Finally, after the third time Vanessa passed her without acknowledgement, Naomi caught her eye. The flight attendant's posture stiffened. "Did you need something?" The tone was cold. "I requested a blanket twice. It's quite cold in this section." Vanessa's expression barely shifted. "We have limited blankets. I'll check if there are any left." 20 minutes passed. No blanket arrived. Naomi made a note on her phone, keeping her face unreadable. This wasn't just bad service. This was calculated. And it was exactly the kind of behavior she was here to track. Meanwhile, Vanessa was growing increasingly tense. The small package hidden in her crew bag felt heavier by the second. She had a routine: slip the package into the first-class restroom. Another passenger picks it up. Easy. But under Naomi's sharp gaze, every move felt exposed. She had to be careful. From her seat, Naomi watched the shift in Vanessa's body language. The way her hands trembled slightly as she poured drinks. The way she checked her crew bag too often, as if reassuring herself the package was still there. The whispers with Logan that fell silent the moment someone else came near. Naomi kept recording every single movement. When Vanessa finally slipped into the first-class restroom, her crew bag in tow, Naomi barely reacted. 2 minutes later, Vanessa reappeared. Her bag looked lighter. A minute later, a well-dressed man casually entered the same restroom. When he returned to his seat, the bulge in his jacket pocket hadn't been there before. The deal was done, right in front of everyone. And Naomi had all the proof she needed. But what she didn't know? Vanessa had just made her next move. And things were about to get much, much worse. Vanessa Reed had been smuggling drugs on flights for months, but what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly predicted, was how far she would go to protect herself when she felt threatened, and right now, she felt very threatened. If you think what she's done so far is bad, just wait, because what happens next will shock you. As the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers settled into their in-flight movies or drifted off to sleep, Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she opened her personal locker in the galley. This was the one place flight attendants could store their personal belongings securely mid-flight. From a hidden pocket inside her makeup bag, she pulled out a second drug package, smaller than the first, but still worth thousands on the streets. This was her cut, her supplier's way of paying her for the risk she took. But tonight, she wouldn't be selling it. Insurance policy, she whispered to herself, slipping the package into the pocket of her apron. What Vanessa didn't realize was that her every move was being recorded. From across the cabin, Naomi Ford's tie pin, equipped with cutting-edge CIA surveillance technology, captured everything. Every nervous glance, every suspicious movement, every step toward setting up an innocent woman. Vanessa had been careful all flight long, but this woman in 3A was too sharp, too aware. Naomi Ford wasn't just another first-class passenger, she was a problem. And Vanessa had a solution. She waited for the perfect moment, when Naomi got up to use the restroom. Vanessa walked casually to her seat, glancing around to make sure most passengers were either asleep or focused on their screens. Perfect. She leaned over, pretending to adjust Naomi's pillow and blanket, the same blanket she had refused to give earlier. And in one smooth motion, she slipped the package into Naomi's handbag, resting innocently on the seat. The trap was set. Now she just needed to find. Naomi returned to her seat and immediately noticed Vanessa lingering near her row. The flight attendant, who had been cold and dismissive all flight, was suddenly acting helpful. "Just making sure you're comfortable," Vanessa said with a fake smile. Naomi didn't react. Her instincts told her something was off. But she didn't realize just how bad it was. Not yet. She calmly sat back down and scanned her surroundings. Nothing seemed disturbed. But what Naomi couldn't see at that moment was that her hidden camera had captured everything. The evidence was safe. The question was, how far would Vanessa take this? Vanessa waited 20 minutes before making her move. Then, she casually walked to the galley and picked up the airphone. "Captain, I think we have a problem," she said, keeping her voice low but serious. "A first-class passenger is acting suspiciously. I believe she may have illegal substances in her bag." She barely had to say more. With strict security protocols in place, the captain immediately notified the air marshal on board. It was done. Now, all Vanessa had to do was sit back and watch as Naomi was publicly humiliated. Vanessa returned to first class with a newfound confidence. This was it. The moment that would erase any suspicion against her and eliminate a problem at the same time. She was flanked by another flight attendant and a plainclothes federal air marshal, a serious-looking man who had been seated inconspicuously among the passengers. Vanessa made sure her voice carried through the quiet cabin. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, stopping in front of Naomi's seat. "We need to check your bag, right now." Naomi slowly looked up from her tablet, her face unreadable. May I ask why? She said, keeping her tone neutral. The air marshal stepped forward. We've received information about potential illegal substances on this flight. Naomi's CIA training kept her calm, even as she saw several passengers turn to watch. Some were already pulling out their phones to record. I don't consent to any search of my personal belongings, Naomi stated. She knew her rights. But it didn't matter. This isn't a request, ma'am, the air marshal said, his voice firm. Under aviation security laws, we are authorized to search passenger belongings if we believe there is a potential risk to flight safety. Before Naomi could respond, Vanessa grabbed her handbag. She opened it, gasped dramatically, and pulled out the small, vacuum-sealed package. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Passengers leaned in. Phones zoomed in on Naomi's face. Vanessa held up the package like she had just discovered a ticking time bomb. What is this? She demanded, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Naomi didn't flinch. Her voice was steady. That is not mine, she said clearly. I have no idea how it got in my bag. Vanessa put on her best look of outrage. It was in your handbag, she accused, turning to the air marshal with wide, concerned eyes. Sir, this looks like prescription drugs being sold illegally. The whispers spread quickly. Unbelievable, a woman across the aisle muttered, and in first class too. They think money lets them get away with anything, another passenger murmured. Naomi heard every word. She had spent years working in counterterrorism, taking down criminal organizations in the most dangerous places in the world. And yet, here she was, being framed in front of a plane full of people who were too eager to believe the worst. The air marshal's expression hardened. Ma'am, I need you to come with me to the back of the plane. This is very serious. Naomi slowly stood, her back straight, her expression composed. I understand you have protocols to follow, she said smoothly. But I want to be very clear, I did not put that package in my bag. Someone else did. And then she turned directly to Vanessa. For the first time, the flight attendant's confident mask slipped. A flicker of doubt flashed across her face. But she recovered quickly. Are you accusing a crew member? Vanessa gasped dramatically. That's ridiculous. The air marshal stepped between them. Ma'am, please come with me now, he ordered. Naomi didn't resist, because she knew something no one else in that cabin did. The real evidence was already recorded, and Vanessa Reed had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The air marshal gripped Naomi Ford's arm, guiding her toward the back of the plane. Behind her, she could hear them. The whispers, the murmurs, the judgment. Can't believe they let people like that in first class. Always check who's sitting next to you when you fly. Good thing they caught her before she could sell that stuff. Every word carried the weight of assumption that Naomi already knew too well. She had spent years protecting this country, taking down drug cartels, dismantling trafficking networks, eliminating threats before they even became news. And yet here she was, paraded through the cabin like a criminal. She didn't fight it. Instead, she leaned slightly toward Vanessa Reed, who stood a few feet away. Smug and victorious, her voice was calm, controlled. You have no idea what you've just done. Vanessa's smirk flickered, just for a second, a flash of doubt. But then, just as quickly, she smoothed her expression into one of pure satisfaction. She had no way of knowing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. When the plane landed at its scheduled stop, airport security boarded immediately. Naomi was escorted off first, her back straight, her head high, dignity intact. But the cameras followed. Passengers recorded her as if she were a spectacle, narrating her supposed downfall to their growing online audiences. She's trying to act like she's innocent. I knew something was off about her the second I saw her. Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to, because none of them had any idea what they were really witnessing. They weren't watching a criminal being taken into custody. They were watching the beginning of an operation that would unravel one of the largest drug smuggling networks in commercial aviation history. Back on the plane, Vanessa was basking in her success. She stood near the galley, replaying the video on her phone while a few crew members gathered around. Did you see her face when I pulled out the drugs? Vanessa laughed, tilting the screen so they could see. Priceless. You should send that to the company, one flight attendant suggested. Might finally get you that promotion. Vanessa grinned. Already put it on social media, she replied smugly. It's going viral as we speak. And it was. Within hours, her edited video, titled "Flight Attendant Catches Drug Smuggler in First Class, Watch What Happens Next," was blowing up across the internet. Thousands of views, then hundreds of thousands. The comments poured in. "Great job catching her. Why am I not surprised who the drug dealer was? This is why I don't trust certain people in first class." The racist undertones in many of them went unchallenged. People weren't questioning the story. They were eating it up. And Vanessa? She was being hailed as a hero. But what none of these viral viewers knew, what Vanessa certainly didn't know, was that the story they thought they were watching was about to flip upside down. Because the woman they had just humiliated on camera, she wasn't just innocent. She was one of the government's top intelligence officers, and she had recorded everything. Meanwhile, Naomi was being escorted through the airport. Phones were still on her, recording, watching. The security officers flanked her, their grip firm. They thought they were handling just another suspect. But as they stepped into a small security office, Naomi finally spoke. "I need to make a phone call," she said, her voice even. One of the officers, a stocky man in his 50s, sighed. "Ma'am, we need to process you first. Then you can..." Naomi slid a black card across the desk. A simple card. No name. No agency. Just a government seal and a single phone number. "Call this number," Naomi said smoothly. "Tell them you have Naomi Ford in custody." The officer frowned, skeptical at first. Then he picked up the phone and dialed. The moment the call connected, his entire demeanor changed. "Yes, sir," he stammered. His back straightened. His grip on the phone tightened. "Right away, sir." "Of course, sir." By the time he hung up, his face had gone pale. The handcuffs were off within seconds. "Ma'am, we had no idea who you were," he said hurriedly. "We're so sorry for the trouble." Naomi merely nodded. "I need a secure line to Langley," she instructed, "and I need access to your airport security footage from the last 3 hours." The officers scrambled to comply. Moments ago, they had treated her like a criminal. Now they were scrambling to follow her orders. And back on the plane, Vanessa Reed was still celebrating her viral moment, completely unaware that the woman she had just tried to destroy was about to dismantle everything she had built. Director Sloan barely looked up from his monitor as Naomi Ford entered the high-security briefing room at CIA headquarters. "I assume things didn't go as planned," he said, voice calm but firm. Naomi set down her carry-on, unpinned the tiny surveillance device from her jacket, and plugged it into the conference room's main console. "Actually," she said smoothly, "they went exactly as they needed to." The large screen on the wall lit up, displaying crystal-clear footage from Naomi's hidden camera. There it was. Vanessa Reed, casually slipping the small drug package into Naomi's handbag while she was in the restroom. The calculated way she later discovered it, making sure the entire cabin saw. The handoff in the galley, a subtle, nearly imperceptible exchange between Vanessa and another crew member. Director Sloan leaned forward. "She didn't just frame you, she's part of a bigger operation." Naomi nodded. "Exactly." The analysts in the room were already working, running facial recognition on the second crew member involved in the handoff. Within seconds, a profile popped up on the screen. Logan Pierce. 5 years with Jetstream Airways. No prior criminal record, at least none on paper. "I've seen this pattern before," Naomi said. "They target passengers of color, knowing authorities are more likely to believe the accusations. If a passenger catches on, they plant evidence, create a distraction, move the product while everyone is too busy watching someone else." Director Sloan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Using racism as a cover for drug smuggling." "Not just a cover," Naomi corrected. "A weapon, and it's effective." She tapped a few keys, bringing up an internal report she had compiled from past cases. Vanessa Reed had been involved in at least 7 similar incidents in the past year alone. Each case followed the same pattern. Every single time, the accused passenger was removed from the flight, humiliated but never actually charged. "It was never about prosecution," Naomi said. "It was about making sure no one looked at her." Sloan's second-in-command, an intelligence analyst named Elliot Vaughn, looked up from his computer. "We just got a request from the CEO of Jetstream Airways," he said. "Apparently, he's asking to meet with you personally, to apologize." Naomi smirked. Good, that gives us an opening. Director Sloan studied the footage again. The real question is, how deep does this go? He murmured. That's what we need to find out, Naomi said, her determination unwavering. And we need to do it before they realize they just tried to frame a federal agent. Sloan nodded. How do you want to handle this? A slow, knowing smile crossed Naomi's face. I think it's time for Miss Reed to meet her new boss. Across the country, in the executive boardroom of Jetstream Airways headquarters, a different kind of storm was brewing. The viral video had exploded. Over 5 million views. News stations were picking up the story, replaying the footage of Vanessa dramatically discovering the drugs. It should have been a PR win. Instead, this is a nightmare, groaned the chief communications officer, scrolling through trending hashtags. Jetstream racist. Flying while black. Boycott Jetstream. The racial implications are blowing up online, she continued. We're being called everything from enablers to outright racists. At the head of the table, CEO Everett Langley paced back and forth, his silver hair slightly disheveled, a rare sight for a man known for his carefully maintained composure. What do we actually know about the situation? He demanded. His head of customer experience cleared his throat. According to the crew report, a first-class passenger was found in possession of illegal substances. The air marshal followed standard procedure. The passenger was detained at the stopover and handed over to local authorities. Langley's expression hardened. And the passenger? Do we have her information? The CCO glanced at her notes. Naomi Ford. Booked a round-trip first-class ticket from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles with a layover in Denver. That's where the incident occurred. Have we reached out to her? Langley asked. Offered an apology? Compensation? A heavy silence fell over the room. The head of security hesitated. Sir, we've been trying, but we're hitting roadblocks. Langley frowned. What kind of roadblocks? The man cleared his throat. Every attempt to access her contact information is met with government clearance blocks. Langley stopped pacing. What? When we called the number on her reservation, the security lead continued, we were transferred 3 times. Eventually, we reached someone who sounded like a federal agent. We were told Miss Ford would contact us when appropriate. A long silence. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Langley's entire demeanor shifted. Are you telling me, he said slowly, that we may have just publicly humiliated a federal agent? The tension in the room grew thick enough to cut. Or a diplomat, someone muttered. Langley inhaled sharply, forcing himself to remain calm. Then his private line rang. The room fell silent as he picked up. Yes, this is Everett Langley. A pause. Then his expression darkened. Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, we will cooperate fully. Absolutely. Thank you for the information. He hung up, setting the phone down carefully. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. That, he said slowly, was the director of the TSA. All eyes locked onto him. The passenger our employee falsely accused and publicly humiliated, Langley said. She's a senior CIA operative. She was conducting a covert security assessment of our airline. Dead silence. A wave of realization washed over the room. This wasn't just a racial profiling scandal anymore. It was a federal case. Langley turned to the head of security. What do they want us to do? The man hesitated. They're sending Agent Ford here. Tomorrow morning. She'll brief us personally. Langley's jaw tightened. And in the meantime, we are to proceed normally, issue our standard "we're investigating" statement, and most importantly, not alert Reed or Pierce that they're under investigation. Langley exhaled through his nose, his mind already working. Understood. Schedule a company-wide meeting tomorrow afternoon. Flight crews from across the network. His CCO blinked. For what? Langley's expression was grim. For a recognition ceremony, he said dryly. The CCO's eyes widened. Are we setting a trap? Langley shook his head. We're not. A pause. But Agent Ford is. The boardroom at Jetstream Airways was silent. Every executive in the room had just watched the unedited security footage. On the massive screen before them, there was no question. Vanessa Reed, one of their own flight attendants, was caught, in clear high definition, slipping the small drug package into Naomi Ford's handbag while she was in the restroom. The dramatic discovery moments later, carefully staged to ensure maximum attention. The discreet handoff in the galley, a move so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't trained to spot criminal behavior. Gasps had filled the room as the truth played out before them. Now, no one spoke. CEO Everett Langley rubbed his temple. And this person works for us? The head of security cleared his throat. Sir, it gets worse. Langley lifted his head, his face already pale. I reviewed the airport footage from the boarding gate and the cabin cameras. The security lead continued. It's all there. The setup, the planting of the drugs, everything. There's no doubt this was a deliberate act. Murmurs of disbelief spread around the room. Then Langley's private line rang. The room fell into absolute silence as he answered. Yes, this is Langley. Everyone watched his face carefully. At first, he simply listened. Then his expression changed. The color drained from his features. His grip on the phone tightened slightly. Yes, sir, I understand, he said, his voice quieter now. Yes, we will cooperate fully. Absolutely. Thank you for the information. When he finally hung up, he looked shaken. That was the director of the TSA. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. The passenger our employee falsely accused and publicly humiliated, Langley said. She's not just an ordinary traveler. A long, tense pause. She's a senior CIA operative. She was conducting a covert security assessment of our airline. The silence was deafening. This wasn't just a PR disaster anymore. This was a full-scale federal investigation. Langley exhaled sharply. What started as a routine security review has now become an inquiry into a suspected drug smuggling ring involving our flight crew. What do they want us to do? The head of legal finally spoke. They're sending Agent Ford here tomorrow morning to brief us personally, Langley replied. A ripple of unease moved through the room. And in the meantime? Langley's expression hardened. We issue a standard, we're investigating statement and most importantly, we do not alert Reed or Pierce that they're under scrutiny. The chief communications officer checked her phone and groaned. Vanessa Reed is scheduled for a morning show interview tomorrow, she said. She's being painted as a hero who stopped a drug smuggler. Langley's jaw tightened. Not for long, he said. He straightened his tie. Schedule a mandatory company-wide meeting tomorrow afternoon, he ordered. Flight crews from across the network. Tell them we're recognizing Reed's actions. The CCO blinked. Are we setting a trap? Langley shook his head. We're not. He paused. But Agent Ford is. The morning after the video went viral, Vanessa Reed walked into the crew entrance of Jetstream Airways feeling like a celebrity. Her phone buzzed non-stop, notifications flooding in from news outlets, strangers, and airline employees alike. The video of her heroic takedown had now crossed 10 million views overnight. There she is, someone called out. Vanessa grinned as a small group of flight attendants applauded her. One even asked for a selfie. She soaked it all in. The admiration, the respect, the fact that it came at the expense of humiliating a black woman in first class didn't bother her one bit. The morning news wants to interview you, said Logan Pierce, handing her a coffee. They called the airline's PR department. Vanessa pretended to act humble. I know, she said. I'm doing it at 11, live from the terminal. Then, another flight attendant rushed over, her phone in hand. Vanessa, have you seen the company email? Vanessa's eyes widened. What is it? The CEO, Everett Langley himself, wants to meet with our entire crew this afternoon. Vanessa stared. Langley? Personally? The email says they want to recognize the crew of Flight 726 for outstanding service and security awareness. Vanessa's heart started pounding. This was it. Her moment. A promotion? Maybe even a chance at management? Her mind raced with possibilities as she headed for the bathroom to freshen up. Standing in front of the mirror, Vanessa practiced her speech. I was just doing my job, she rehearsed, tilting her head slightly. The safety of our passengers is always my first priority. She tried out different expressions of fake modesty. What she didn't say, what she wouldn't say, was how satisfying it had been to watch that woman's humiliation. How good it felt to see her led away in disgrace. Vanessa applied one last coat of lipstick, her pulse thrumming with excitement. Then, her phone buzzed. A text from her supplier. Saw the video. Not smart. Drawing attention. Meeting canceled this week. Vanessa frowned. Why were they so worried? This attention was perfect. Who would ever suspect the hero flight attendant of being a drug mule? She typed back quickly. Relax. This is good for us. We'll call later. What Vanessa didn't know, at that very moment, Logan Pierce was being trailed by two plainclothes federal agents. Her supplier's phone had already been tapped, and the meeting she was so excited for was never going to happen. While Vanessa Reed was rehearsing her humble, insincere lines in front of a mirror, the real power players were gathering across town. At the heart of it all, a woman whose name the world was about to know. Naomi Ford, CIA operative, the architect of Vanessa's downfall. The large conference room at Jetstream Airways headquarters was packed. Flight crews from across the airline's network had been summoned for what they believed was a special recognition event. There was an excited buzz in the air, and in the front row, Vanessa Reed, seated with perfect posture, her uniform crisp, Logan Pierce beside her, shifting uncomfortably. Vanessa's smile was wide but controlled, the look of someone who believed she was about to be publicly celebrated. Logan leaned in, voice low. "Why are there security guards at the doors?" he asked. Vanessa barely spared them a glance. "Probably because the CEO is coming," she said. "Stop being paranoid." But she didn't notice. These weren't the usual corporate security guards. They had the sharp, assessing eyes of people trained for more than event security. They were federal agents. At exactly 2 p.m., the side door swung open. Everett Langley, CEO of Jetstream Airways, entered. His executive team followed, their expressions unusually serious for what was supposed to be an employee celebration. "Good afternoon," Langley began, his voice lacking the warmth of typical recognition ceremonies. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." Vanessa sat up even straighter, ready for her moment in the spotlight. "As many of you know, an incident occurred on Flight 726 yesterday that gained significant attention on social media and news outlets." Langley continued. Vanessa nodded along, already imagining herself being called to the front. But then, Langley's tone shifted. "What you don't know," he said, his voice turning sharp, "is that this incident revealed a serious security breach within our airline." A murmur ran through the crowd. The energy in the room changed. Confusion replaced excitement. Vanessa's smile began to falter. "Today," Langley continued, "I want to introduce someone who will be leading a new joint task force between Jetstream Airways and federal authorities." Vanessa blinked. "Wait, what?" "This person will be investigating security vulnerabilities and potential criminal activity within our staff," Langley said. Vanessa's stomach dropped. This wasn't what she expected. Then Langley turned toward the side door. "Please welcome Special Agent Naomi Ford." The door opened again, and the woman who walked through it, the same woman Vanessa had humiliated just 24 hours earlier. But transformed. Gone was the casual travel attire. In its place, a perfectly tailored dark suit, and hanging visibly around her neck, her CIA credentials. Vanessa's blood ran cold. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Beside her, Logan instinctively tried to stand, eyes darting toward the exits. But his path was blocked. A security officer, one who definitely hadn't been standing there before, had quietly stepped in front of their row. The entire room was now silent. Naomi walked to the podium, her expression unreadable. Then, her gaze met Vanessa's, a look that said everything. "I warned you." "Thank you, Mr. Langley," Naomi began, her voice strong, steady, and full of authority. "For those who don't know me, I'm Special Agent Naomi Ford of the Central Intelligence Agency's Counter-Narcotics Division." A ripple of shock spread through the audience, whispers, uneasy glances. Vanessa felt the room start to close in around her. "Yesterday," Naomi continued, "while conducting an undercover assessment of security protocols on Flight 726, I was falsely accused of drug possession." She paused, scanning the stunned faces before her. What the person who made these accusations didn't realize was that every moment of our interaction was being recorded. She nodded to a technician at the back of the room. A massive screen behind her lit up, and suddenly, the entire room was watching Vanessa's crime in high definition. Vanessa slipping the drugs into Naomi's bag. Her exaggerated discovery in front of first class. The hushed drug exchange in the galley with Logan Pierce. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Some flight attendants covered their mouths in shock. Others turned to stare at Vanessa, whose face had gone from flushed to ashen. Naomi continued, her voice unwavering. "What you're witnessing is not just a case of racial profiling and false accusations. You're seeing evidence of a drug trafficking operation that has been using commercial aviation as its distribution network. Specifically, an operation that has targeted and framed passengers of color when they feared exposure. And then, Logan snapped. Logan suddenly stood up, his voice panicked. "She made me do it," he blurted out, pointing at Vanessa. "She said we'd never get caught." Vanessa whipped toward him, eyes blazing. "Shut up, Logan," she hissed, but it was too late. 2 federal agents were already moving toward them. Naomi watched them carefully, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything else. The truth was already out, and Vanessa Reed was about to lose everything. Vanessa gripped Logan Pierce's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Shut up," she hissed, but it was too late. 2 federal agents stepped forward. "Miss Reed, Mr. Pierce, please come with us." The room held its breath as the agents closed in. Vanessa stiffened. Logan went pale. And Naomi Ford? She turned back to the stunned audience, her expression calm, controlled. She wasn't finished yet. "As you've just witnessed," Naomi addressed the room, "this was never about one flight. One incident, one mistake." Behind her, the screen shifted. A timeline appeared, one spanning over a year. Multiple flights, multiple passengers, all falsely accused. Multiple instances of drugs being moved undetected. Vanessa Reed wasn't just profiling passengers based on race, Naomi continued. She was using racial bias as a tool, exploiting it to cover up a sophisticated drug trafficking operation. Murmurs spread through the audience. Some flight attendants looked horrified. Others glanced at Vanessa in disgust. Because the truth was undeniable now. And Vanessa? She was losing control. Vanessa suddenly yanked her arm free from the agent's grip. Her composure shattered. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "You're just believing her because she has a badge." Naomi barely flinched. "Drugs that you planted, Miss Reed," she said smoothly. "That video could be fake." Vanessa's voice grew shriller. "You people always stick together, don't you?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Several employees physically recoiled at the thinly veiled racism in her words. Naomi stepped down from the podium, approaching her slowly, stopping just a few feet away. Her voice remained steady, carrying across the silent room. "Miss Reed, I have spent 16 years serving this country in ways you cannot imagine. I have faced discrimination in places far more dangerous than a first-class cabin. But in all my years of service, I have rarely encountered someone who so openly and shamelessly used racism as a tool for criminal activity." Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. She found none. A voice suddenly rang out from the back. "That's a lie, Vanessa." The room turned. Simone Harris, a flight attendant in her mid-40s, stood up, arms crossed. "You've made comments about passengers of color for years. You've questioned their first-class tickets. You've seated them away from white passengers whenever possible. We all heard you. We just didn't say anything." Others in the room nodded in agreement. Vanessa's face twisted in fury. "It wasn't about race," she snapped. "I would have reported anyone suspicious." "That's not true," another voice cut in. More flight attendants began speaking up. A wave of long-ignored complaints began surfacing in real time. And Logan Pierce? He saw the walls closing in. He had one last chance to save himself. "She's the one who contacted the suppliers," Logan blurted out. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "She said security never checks crew bags. She said it was easy money, it was all her idea." Vanessa lunged at him, rage twisting her features. "You lying." But the agents restrained her. "Miss Reed," one of them said coolly, "you are facing federal charges for drug trafficking, evidence tampering, filing false reports, and civil rights violations. I strongly suggest you stop talking until you have a lawyer present." Vanessa tried to yank away from them. "You think you've won?" She spat at Naomi. "People will still believe my video. They'll believe what they want to believe about people like you." The room stayed silent. Then Naomi met her gaze one final time. "That's why people like me," she said quietly, "need to keep showing up in places people like you don't think we belong." "The truth always comes out, Miss Reed. Always." Vanessa's face crumpled, and as the agents led her away, she knew. Her life was over. Everett Langley stepped back to the podium. His expression was firm. "What we have witnessed today is deeply disturbing, but it also presents an opportunity. An opportunity to change the way we operate, not just in this airline, but in the industry as a whole. The room listened intently, because this wasn't just about Vanessa Reed. It was about the system that allowed her to thrive. And as Naomi scanned the faces in the room, she knew justice wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about changing the environment that allowed them to exist in the first place. In the days following the confrontation, the truth spread like wildfire. Vanessa's viral video, once celebrated, was now a symbol of racial profiling and corruption. The hidden footage from Naomi's tie-pin was broadcasted nationwide. The investigation expanded, leading to more arrests across multiple airlines. And Vanessa Reed? She was now in federal custody, awaiting a trial that would send her away for a very long time. For 2 years, a network of flight attendants across multiple airlines had been using racial bias as a shield for their drug smuggling operation. They had successfully framed passengers of color, knowing that airport security would be more likely to believe their accusations. And for 2 years, it worked, until they targeted the wrong person. The impact on Jetstream Airways was immediate and far-reaching. But unlike other companies that might have tried to cover it up, CEO Everett Langley took a different approach. He faced it head-on. What happened on our aircraft represents a failure on multiple levels, he stated in a press conference 3 days after the arrests. Not just in security protocols, but in our company culture. We are committed to making this right. And with Naomi Ford's guidance, Jetstream Airways implemented sweeping reforms. A comprehensive anti-bias training program for all employees. A complete overhaul of security procedures. A new passenger advocacy office, created specifically to investigate complaints of discriminatory treatment. For the first time in the airline's history, passengers had a real system of accountability. And it was long overdue. In a private office overlooking the airport tarmac, Naomi sat across from Simone Harris, the senior flight attendant who had spoken up during Vanessa Reed's downfall. Simone's hands were clasped together, her voice quiet. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "What happened to you on that flight, it's happened before." Naomi studied her, and when passengers complained, Simone exhaled slowly. Nobody believed them. A long pause. "Did it ever happen to you?" Naomi asked. Simone nodded. "Not the drug accusations, but the rest of it. The assumptions, the way Vanessa and some others talked about certain passengers. I tried to report it once, 3 years ago." Naomi tilted her head. "What happened?" Simone's jaw tightened. "Nothing. They said without proof it was just, he said, she said." Naomi leaned forward. "That's why the hidden camera footage was so powerful," she said. "For the first time, people couldn't deny what was happening." She paused. "Would you be willing to help lead the new training program?" Simone's eyes widened. "Me? I'm just a flight attendant." Naomi shook her head. "There's no just about it. You're exactly who needs to be heard." For the first time in a long time, Simone felt like her voice actually mattered. Meanwhile, in a federal holding facility, Vanessa Reed sat alone. Gone were the designer clothes, the perfectly styled hair, the practiced smile. Now, she wore an orange jumpsuit, and the weight of reality finally hit her. Her lawyer had been blunt. The video evidence was damning. Witness testimony had piled up against her. And Logan Pierce had turned on her completely, taking a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. Her sentence? A minimum of 15 years, with the possibility of more due to the civil rights violations she had committed. There would be no promotions, no career in aviation, no adoring public, just time. A lot of it. 6 months later, Naomi stood at the front of a large training room at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Seated before her, 30 new air marshals, flight crew members from multiple airlines, future security professionals. What you're about to see has become a textbook case in how bias can be weaponized, Naomi said, clicking to start the presentation. On the large screen, the now infamous video played. Vanessa Reed slipping the drugs into Naomi's bag. Her exaggerated discovery in front of first class. The hushed exchange in the galley. Naomi paused the footage, then she turned to face the room. "The passenger targeted in this video was me." A hush fell over the room. Some had known. Others hadn't. "But I want you to consider," Naomi continued, "how this story would have ended if I hadn't been a federal agent with a hidden camera. If I had been just an ordinary traveler." Silence. A heavy silence. the kind that comes when people start reevaluating everything they thought they knew. Every day, Naomi continued, people face assumptions, accusations, and unfair treatment based on how they look. Usually, there's no dramatic courtroom revelation, no justice served, just another person who learns that the world sees them differently. She clicked to the next slide. A photo appeared, Vanessa Reed, being processed into federal prison. Last week, Naomi said, Vanessa Reed was sentenced to 18 years for drug trafficking, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The room absorbed the information. Naomi moved through the rest of the training presentation, explaining how the drug smuggling ring had operated, how racial profiling had been weaponized, how the investigation had uncovered similar schemes at 2 other airlines. The lesson here isn't just about catching criminals, she concluded. It's about the systems that allow them to operate, the biases that make their schemes possible, the silence of those who see but don't speak up. Eyes around the room lowered slightly, because they all knew this wasn't just a problem of the past, it was a problem still happening today, and what they did next would determine whether it continued. Elsewhere, at an airport terminal across the country, a Jetstream Airways flight prepared for departure. In the first-class cabin, a young black man settled into his seat. The lead flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Simone Harris. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said warmly. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" The interaction was simple, unremarkable, exactly how it should have been all along. But in an industry that had ignored these issues for so long, it was also a sign of change, a small step toward something better. And all of it started with one flight, one lie that went too far, and one woman who refused to back down. The fall of Vanessa Reed wasn't just about a single crime. It wasn't just about a smuggling operation or a disgraced flight attendant. It had exposed something deeper, a systemic problem that had been ignored for too long. A few days later in her Langley office, Naomi Ford sat at her desk, reviewing reports from the now-closed investigation. That's when she noticed a letter among the usual agency memos. No return address, no official letterhead, just a handwritten note from someone she had never met. She opened it. "After your case went public, I started noticing things on my own flights. The different ways we treat different passengers, the assumptions we make. I've started speaking up now. It's not always easy, but I think about what happened to you, and I find my voice. Thank you for changing more than just one airline." Naomi sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She added the letter to a growing file, one filled with similar messages from people who had finally begun to see. Because sometimes, justice wasn't just about putting criminals behind bars. Sometimes, it was about changing the conversation. As Naomi prepared for her next assignment, she knew one case, however high profile, wouldn't erase centuries of bias, but it had done something just as important. It had created an opening, a moment when people who normally resisted these conversations were finally listening, and sometimes, that's where real change begins. In her final report on Operation Flight Risk, Naomi Ford wrote the words that would later be inscribed on the wall of the FBI Civil Rights Division. Justice is not just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems where doing right becomes the easiest choice for everyone.